this program together. I'm going to give a little bit of context about today's webinar and also thank our sponsor. Today's webinar is part of the California Association of Museums CAM Fellowship Program, which has been in existence for about 10 years. This program allows alumni of the Getty Morrow Undergraduate Internship Program to attend the CAM conference and develop case studies based on sessions that inspired them. These case studies offer expanded understanding of topics that were discussed at the CAM conference and helps apply lessons learned in other institutions. I'd like to thank the Getty Foundation for their generous funding to continue the CAM Fellows program. We simply could not do this program without their support. Our first presenter today is Sarah Smallhouse. Sarah grew up in Northern California. She completed her Getty Multicultural Internship at the Vincent Price Art Museum on the East Los Angeles campus in 2007. Receiving her BA in Art History in 2008, she has since worked at the Hollywood Bowl Museum, Janet Turner Print Museum, Valine L. Smith Museum of Anthropology, and the Chico History Museum. She completed her master's in art history with coursework in museum studies in 2015. She is currently tenure-track art history faculty at Butte College, where she hopes to develop museum courses and enjoys being on the board of directors of the Museum of Northern California Art. So Sarah, welcome, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Celeste. Well, I really appreciate everyone for listening to my presentation today. I also wanted to thank CAM for this amazing opportunity. I've only been to one other CAM conference, and I can say with gratitude that each has been a really transformative experience. So I'm really glad I can share that with you today. I also want to thank Lacey for being such an amazing support through this process. It's been a really fun experience, both attending the conference and writing the article afterwards. So I thank Lacey for her support, and of course thank the Getty as well, because this is really where my museum journey began. Okay. So what I really like about these CAM conferences is that I'm seeing these really interesting sort of big picture issues. Where I'm located is currently, it's a pretty rural area, and where we have a dynamic but small museum community. And so it's really interesting to see these big ideas play out, how they play out in a different way, sort of in our rural space. So I really liked the influence and power session, which discussed soft power. I believe that was last year, maybe. And discussing museums as institutions of power, because I totally saw the connection to their Change the Narrative concept this year in San Francisco. So I chose to attend the Creating Responsive Spaces for Hot Topics because we are constantly trying to reach out to our community. I am part of MONCA, Museum of Northern California Art. And while we are successful, I feel, at reaching our community, the arts and culture are not always as emphasized in our community. And so I wanted to find ways to make ourselves relevant to the surrounding community. And basically, I couldn't have been more fortunate to experience Whitney's talk from MA, the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History, about community issue exhibitions. So there's a slight delay in my PowerPoint. I'm waiting for it to switch over. All right, so while I'm waiting for my PowerPoint slides to switch over, I'll go ahead and discuss kind of where I started with my conference experience. Basically, It was with keynote speaker Tamika Butler. Her talk on diversity versus inclusion was hugely significant to how I understood the rest of the conference. Let's see. There we go. Thank you. Great. So sorry, that's a little bit about me, and you can see my collaborator, Whitney Ford Terry from Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. She's their exhibit catalyst. I saw her discuss their community issue exhibition, their first one, I believe, which was Lost Childhood, an exhibit about transition age foster youth. I believe it's 18 to 25 years old. So Whitney hadn't actually participated in that exhibit, but she did create their next community exhibition, which was focused on seniors. And I actually got to go see that. I'll talk about that a little bit towards the end of my presentation. So in order to really share the story, I kind of chose to tell it through the perspective of my museum and where we were coming from, just because it's really difficult for me to not hear all of these amazing ideas and want to sort of implement them right away in my own life and in my own world. So I'm sort of telling the story of Santa Cruz community issue exhibitions, while giving at the same time my own takeaways, what I'm planning to use at MONCA, the Museum of Northern California Art. Okay, great, now we're back on track. So Tamika Butler is a litigator and nonprofit leader and gives a lot of workshops. I got to see some of her speeches online afterwards as well. But what she discussed was basically that diversity and inclusion are not necessarily the same things. Diversity means, yes, having a diverse range of folks represented. But what she really would like, at least with museums, to see is the relinquishing of power to these underrepresented groups so that they can actually be in a position of making decisions and therefore being truly represented and being truly included in the museum world. That just made so much sense to me. If we are trying to change the narrative from one that is museum generated to one that is, told by the people we are intending to reach, then what better way than to invite them in to tell those stories? And that is exactly what Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History, MA, I should call them by short, that's exactly what they're trying to do with these community issue exhibitions. So I saw Tamika right at the beginning, and I was basically wearing Tamika glasses for the rest of the conference. So that was a really important moment for me. So a little bit about this exhibit process, the process of community issue exhibitions, is outlining a strategy for how to collaborate with these different groups that are being invited to share with the museum. I think it's always a little bit of risk or uncertainty with involving different groups. I think it's all the more rewarding because of it. But I think what's really important about the toolkit that Ma has provided, that is included in my article, and that I'll outline some of the main points of, is to reduce that risk a little bit. I mean, to provide a formal structure that will relieve an organization from experiencing some of the pitfalls of collaboration, some of the unknowns. And I mean, even the fact that they offer this toolkit for free on the MAW website, I think just goes to show how committed they really are to this idea of inviting people in, sharing museum spaces, making museums relevant to their communities, and telling community stories. Not to mention the fact that there's an advocacy component, which I will also discuss a little bit further in just a moment. So the first thing that MAW did was establish their key partners. So key partners share the bulk of the responsibilities when it comes to curation and providing content. So you can have a lot more collaborators, but that key partner group has to be small, because it's a large responsibility, but it also better reflects that group if it is a smaller group. So just to talk a little bit about the key partners they had, primarily, I believe, it was foster youth. So, immediately inviting the group that they intend to represent to be a part of that storytelling is a really huge component. Other collaborators, so, outside of their key partner group, were also of other organizations, so community organizations, social workers, policymakers. So it ended up being kind of a bigger group represented, but at its core were those key partners. And also, what separates a community issue exhibition from, many other exhibitions is that there's an issue driving it, right? So they had to kind of pick what they were trying to do with the exhibit. And they have that advocacy element where people could actually, while learning through the exhibit, visually and through all of their interactives, there was this takeaway where people could feel empowered to take some kind of action to help this group. So there are I don't want to use pros and cons, but I'm going to, because I can't think of other words right now. There are pros and cons to creating an exhibition like this. The con, as mentioned in the toolkit, is that it can be more expensive. Collaborating with other groups can, yield more costs. In fact, they recommend to prepare for up to 2 to 3 times your usual budget for an exhibition. However, in collaborating with all of these different groups, there is the potential to get more sponsorship and more money at the same time. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I mean, they almost sort of cancel each other out in that way. Another thing that I hadn't really thought about different is that you need to, so something that Whitney was talking about is, if you're trying to target a group that might, work odd hours or have, sort of a non-conventional 9-to-5 schedule, then you need to be prepared to meet them outside of, those hours. You might need to provide childcare. You might need to provide food, compensation, parking. And I thought that was really important, because I feel that perhaps without offering those things, without knowing the needs of that group, a museum really isn't connecting with that group on the level in which I think they intend. So, and taking these actions to really support the group that they are inviting, to really make them the voice of the exhibition, these are the kinds of steps, meeting them at where they are is extremely important to avoid exploiting that group. So I thought that was hugely important. So here's where the advocacy component comes into play. And it was also a way to measure the impact of the exhibit. So they had a whole wall. This is just one small image, but they had a whole wall of these cards. You can see that they're translated, which again, I think is a really wise choice. But these cards really are just simple things that, you know, people, visitors coming to this exhibit can do in order to help this group, to take action, to be an advocate for transition age foster youth. And I love it. A lot of them are really small things. So as a museum visitor, you could take one of these cards, and on the back, obviously, is more information about how to do this. So this is where those collaborators, those community organizations, this is how they could really get involved to the with the exhibit, so that it's not merely educating people about the issues that transition age foster youth experience, which obviously is still extremely important, but the visitor can leave feeling empowered to take some kind of action. To really taking this group. So that was one way in which they measured these cards, and hopefully, you know, both learning and also taking action on them. So they had to, again, refill these cards often. So that was demonstrating some level of success with this exhibit. I think it was documented that over the 6 months that it was open, they had 70,000 visitors, which is really remarkable. Another way that they were able to determine the success and impact of this exhibit was with their, you know, community partners, not key partners, but community partners. So those are those organizations. So by tracking, you know, the amount of volunteer signups they had had since the exhibit opened, it also demonstrated a level of impact the exhibit was having on the community at large. So I think this advocacy component is really, really important. You know, sometimes what I notice with a lot of museum work is that it's hard for museums to often come out and make a statement, because they're, you know, trying to represent a public as a whole. I think this is such an important way to bring activism, almost on a slight degree, into the museum, where it's educational, welcoming, and so much more. So I really enjoyed this approach. You can get their toolkit from the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History website. And I highly recommend it. It's such an easy read. It's really, and they're totally transparent in their process. So I wanted to see Whitney's new efforts with their next community issue exhibition, which was called We're Still Here. So in this exhibition, they invited Santa Cruz seniors to share their stories. And it discusses a lot of things, including the health issues that seniors face that are magnified by their social isolation. So I went to opening night. I took my family. I went to opening night, and there were commissioned artworks, collections. There was a piece where you could pick up a handset, and a museum interactive where you could pick up a handset, and there were these seniors telling stories and their experience of being alone and probably of other things as well. There was video, and there was a performance piece that took place inside these almost like dioramas of rooms. So isolation was a really apparent part of the exhibit, just explored in many different ways. So, I mean, some of the things, I took a couple of the Take Action cards. They're using that wall again here now to help for actions for seniors. But a couple of the cards that I took were, you know, teach an art class to seniors, or buy art supplies for seniors. So, you know, obviously I was taking art ones, but there were a lot of different ways. And so again, on the back of the card, on the reverse of the card, was the information to contact those organizations. And it was just a really simple way to connect that educational material and build upon the empathy that is made in the exhibit, so that people don't feel as though they are unable to do anything. It's a very positive way to create change by allowing for these actions. So I believe that this is the performance piece. So one of the things that MA does as part of their community issue exhibitions is they commission pieces from artists. So I think the phone piece, the interactive phone storytelling piece was also done by an artist. And this was a quick photo of the performance piece. You can see that was led by Sid Perlman. It was extremely moving. The whole exhibit was extremely moving. And so I just want to commend Whitney and her team and the museum with their efforts on this piece. My family was all extremely moved. And this is my daughter. She did the craft. They had seniors volunteer at the exhibit. One of them was running this craft for a quilt. My daughter really wanted to do that. So, I mean, the opening was just packed, and it's really, I can only imagine what that must feel to the impacted group being represented, to see so many people come out and learn and feel for this group. I think that the work that they're doing with these community issue exhibitions is just really, really amazing. And what am I planning to do with this information? I really like these collaborative exhibitions. I love working with people, and so that's how I've always approached curation, is kind of sharing that responsibility with others. And so, you know, even though we're a rural community up in Chico, it's really a rich place, a culturally rich place. And so one group that the museum has not collaborated with yet is our Hmong population. So right now I have my key partners. These are my key partners. Stacy Lee, founder of Ka, which is a Hmong cultural publication. She's in the center. And then Elizabeth Lee is a visual artist. And are creating an exhibit as this in traditional Hmong culture. So if, as a younger generation, if they are in the arts, it's completely impossible for them to communicate that to an older generation. And so what we're working on as our issue is how to both create visibility of contemporary Hmong American art in our community, but also how to communicate that to an older generation in which there's not even the word for art in a in their language. So that's the issue that's most important to them, or those are the two issues that are most important to them. And that's really where we're working and developing our community partners who else can collaborate and benefit. Because the museum is sort of all of Northern California, we're really hoping to create a lot of connections between Hmong American artists sort of all along Northern California, because those communities don't always feel connected to one another. And so I think that will be an added benefit if we can establish some kind of network through trying to create this exhibit. And I think that's it for me. I apologize if I ended a little bit early, but yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you for listening to me talk. And I guess I'm ready for questions if there are any.
Great. Let me do, thank you, Sarah. Let me do one more call out for questions. If you have a question, you could do it in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask your question yourself.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you for that presentation.
Thank you so much.
Museum of Art and History in Santa Cruz. Great. So our second CAM Fellow presenter today is Jamie Nord. Jamie has a bachelor's in anthropology from the University of Redlands and will be obtaining her master's in applied archaeology from California State San Bernardino. She is currently interning at the San Bernardino County Museum as an anthropology curator intern and will be going to Belize this summer for archaeology field school at a Mayan site. In the summer of 2018, she interned at UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center as a research and preservation intern through the Getty Morrow undergraduate internship program. So, Jamie, are you on?
Hi, thank you, Celeste.
Wonderful, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in on your lunch hour for this presentation. I would like to thank the Getty Foundation and everyone at CAM, as well as my home institution, the San Bernardino County Museum, for letting me intern there this year. Yeah, I am an anthropology curator intern, and this past year was my first CAM conference. I had an amazing experience, and I think that as a first timer at CAM, I attended the pre-conference workshop, and this was my first experience, you know, the first thing that I saw at the conference, and it had a huge impact on me. It really set the tone for the rest of the conference for me, this workshop, because it was the first day, the first thing, and it was just amazing. And I just ended up going to panels that were similar topics, and it really made an impression on me. So I know that most CAM fellows usually do their case study on a panel, but I just felt this workshop was so significant. So I had the pleasure of working with Mallory Gnauer. So I'd like to take this opportunity to also thank Mallory and everyone at Verona Cultural Center and Museum for their amazing work and their collaboration. So I'll go ahead and get started. So the workshop was called Native Voice, Bridging Our Ways of Knowing, and it was at the Walt Disney Family Museum. And so if you were unable to attend that, you missed out, but you're going to get to hear all about it today. So it was co-hosted by Verona Cultural Center and Museum and the California Indian Museum and Cultural Center. So I worked with education coordinator Mallory Gnauer from Verona for the development of this case study. And as you are all probably aware, the 2019 conference theme centered around changing the narrative. And I felt this pre-conference workshop strongly aligned with this theme since it emphasized how museum institutions can bridge this gap surrounding narrative of Native American culture in California. And so it focused on the development of public programming for institutions, tribal and non-tribal museums to engage the public in a Native American perspective. So there were numerous speakers from both Verona Cultural Center and Museum and from California Indian Museum and Cultural Center, and they were all great. And since the workshop was such in high demand, I think it was sold out, they had to split us into 2 groups. And so during my segment, if I can control this while I'm gonna wait for the screen to load, but during my segment of the workshop with the speakers from Verona, I learned about multiple activities developed for youth groups when they visit the museum. So Verona Cultural Center and Museum is a tribal museum located in San Diego County, and they represent the Kumeyaay Degeno people. I'm having trouble with this screen, but
Amy, you're muted right now. I'm going to unmute you. Unmute. There we go.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you control back and try, once I give you control back, try clicking in the middle of the screen, and I think that should make it work. Sorry about that. Okay, there we go.
Well, I'm still having, I don't know, my screen is not changing.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, thank you. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Sorry
about that. Okay, let's see. So the Verona Cultural Center and Museum informed us during the workshop how they work to engage students specifically during these visits, and schools are a large draw to the museum. They have a lot of field trips from schools all over San Diego County. And so it's really important to, decide how to engage these students who can range in age from, young elementary to, high school students. But they get a lot of elementary and middle school visits. So Mallory explained how her programs will incorporate multiple school subjects like art and science and history, and often incorporate the California content standards from the Board of Education. So during the workshop, the other attendees and I experienced some of these activities from the perspective of a student. All right, so the first activity focused on the science of mixing paint from natural earth pigments and binders, and I have a couple photos from my experience here. So the Verona team provided us with information about the context of paint mixing for Kumeyaay Degeno ancestors, and we learned how they can be used for body painting and rock art. And we learned about the science behind some of the different binders and pigments. So you can see in the photo here that we have white chalk, black charcoal, yellow and red ochre for the pigments. And then you can see the binders in the cups are water, agave syrup, cucumber seed oil, and pumpkin seed oil. And so we were encouraged to mix all the different combinations. And it was kind of like a little science experiment to see the thickness of each, composition, and, testing the different amount of binder to see how it reacted on the paper. And it was a really, really enjoyable experience. And I could see, you know, honestly, even I'm in my 20s and I thought it was really fun. So I can imagine as a student that they would really enjoy getting to test all the different pigments. And so we tested them on a little chart, and then we were encouraged to create our own design, and we were given some information of different traditional ceramic motifs, which I've included here. Oh, well, I have my own pottery design. So yeah, I got to use the traditional motifs to create my own design, just to apply the new knowledge, and that is something that they do with students as well. So that was really fun to be able to incorporate this new knowledge in my own artwork. And it's just a very basic artwork. I'm not the greatest artist, but you get the idea. And so we also learned how young students often enjoy the instant gratification of being able to build their own creation or artwork and have something physical to take away from the experience and bring it home. And then they can show it to their family, their friends, and say, I made this and I learned it, and talk about what they learned. And then they can visualize that new knowledge and apply that new knowledge about the culture. So after painting, during the workshop, we learned about timekeeping and astronomy. And we got to build our very own star finders. So for those of you that do not know, a star finder is a circular map with an overlay that kind of rotates to show an opening in the overlay, a region of the sky that is visible for a specified time and date and location. So Verona had already prepared all these paper materials for us, and you can see their beautiful illustration in the corner. I have a photo on the bottom left, and it shows the traditional Kumeyaay calendar. And so each of these constellations is also in the Kumeyaay language, and it demonstrates a traditional philosophy or creation story. And also, Mallory and the museum have a new exhibit opening in 2020 about the Kumeyaay creation story. So there's going to be more information about this upcoming exhibit on the museum's website if you want to learn more about it. I'm really excited. I hope to attend it when it opens. But so anyways, this activity is very simple and straightforward, really for any age. You really just need to prepare the materials, and then it's just very basic. You just need, I would recommend safety scissors for young children. That way they don't hurt themselves when they cut the paper, but you basically just have to cut it out, and you just need to fold the paper together for the overlay. And you can just use glue or tape to keep it folded. So this workshop highlighted how important it is to expose students from an early age about California's pre-contact history and contact history and its indigenous culture. So the Verona Cultural Center and Museum often hosts tours, as I mentioned, for elementary and middle schools at their institution to help bridge this gap. And Mallory as well also travels directly to schools in San Diego County to bring the museum directly into the classroom, which I think is fabulous, and I really commend her for that. And she brings artifacts from the museum collection to incorporate into her presentation to make it more holistic and more of a visual experience for students. However, the experience, well, it's more beneficial, I think, for the students if they are able to travel to the museum, just because logistically they are able to experience more of the collection and more about the culture instead of in a classroom. But I think that a classroom presentation is still an amazing opportunity for students who maybe do not have the resources to visit the museum. And so the museum can host as many as 200 students at a time, and the museum will often break up the students into smaller groups when they're dealing with a group that large, just because the students can experience the cultural center in a more intimate and hands-on fashion. And so the Verona will often prepare activities for them to experience, and they can, like I mentioned, make star finders or pigments, or even learn how to hunt with rabbit sticks. However, the Cultural Center is really encouraged to gauge the tour to the specific grade level in order to incorporate part of the state curriculum into the grade level from each grade level as much as possible. This is due to budgeting costs for bus transportation during a field trip. The teachers need to kind of get the most out of it in terms of cost due to budgeting. So it really is incentivized to use part of the content standards. And at the San Bernardino County Museum where I intern, we also often host field trips, huge groups of field trips, several hundred students at a time. And I know that many other museums do as well. And it's always such a crazy day with those field trip days, just because the parking lot is packed with buses and the students have so much energy and they're so excited and they're running around and they just seem to take over the institution in, you know, the most amazing way. And our building is actually fairly large, but even then with so many students, it's hard to coordinate them and even find the space to divide them up. So if you have any kind of outdoor space, I really recommend utilizing that, because the children will love to be outside anyways, and it helps to kind of break up the noise, you know, especially inside, you know, voices can really travel and it's hard for some of the students to hear above other voices. So I know that we like to break them up and have a group that's outside, and know that Verona does as well. And I think that if a museum has enough staff or volunteers to assist on those days, it can definitely be beneficial to break them up into smaller groups instead of trying to present to 100 students at once. And so the language that the tour guides at Verona use also depends on the age of the students. For example, the Verona staff tries to make a topic relatable to elementary students in order to help them understand and conceptualize certain topics. However, they do not shy away from, difficult topics like genocide and forced labor, especially when discussing the Californian missions. Especially since most students already have an understanding of slavery by the grade of 4th or 5th grade. So the educators simply try to use language that younger students already have in their vocabulary while also talking about these topics. And in 7th grade, students learn about the Holocaust in California state curriculum. So the concept of genocide allows their tours to be more nuanced because they have that next level of understanding. So in this way, the museum educators build off of the grade level content standards. And as many of you are probably aware, in 4th grade, students learn a unit called California Changing Fate, and they spend several weeks learning the pre-contact history of California, and then they spend another several weeks learning about European contact and explore the history of the Californian missions. And so this culminates in a report on the mission, and each student builds their own model of a specific mission. And I've included a photo example here. However, it is important to note that the Native American experience is not the focus within the California Board of Education content standards. And Verona Cultural Center and Museum seeks to retell how this history is told by incorporating Native voices into public education curriculum and provide students with an accurate representation of this time period. And so this can be accomplished by supplying teachers with additional resources when they teach this unit, especially primary sources. And for example, the journals of the Padres can be used. And so the museum emphasizes to teachers the use of primary sources when the students begin doing their research, and it just really sets an example of when they get into high school, the importance of primary sources as well, just for accurate research. And so far, Verona has been reaching out to educators to provide these resources, and the teachers have been very eager to learn about this, and they want the best for their students as well. So they've been excited to use this in their units of their teaching of this unit. And at Verona, the museum educators try to inform visitors during their tours, including their tours for students, about the real Native American experience within the mission. For example, their tours often describe forms of active and passive resistance on the missions, such as how Native Americans performed their traditional ceremonies in secret during Catholic feast days. And this led the missionaries to think that they were embracing Catholic traditions, while in reality they were helping to keep alive their own culture and religion. And they want the public, especially the youth, to understand how their culture survived the atrocities of the missionary period, and that they want to emphasize that Native American groups are not only part of California's history, but also part of California's present as well. It's really important for students to understand. That way they do not grow up to think a fallacy about the reality of California and its culture and its diversity. So Mallory is currently helping to bridge this gap in another way between institutionalized state curriculum and the Native American experience. She, in addition to working with public schools through outreach and tours, she's also doing this through her work of creating an alternative curriculum to the 4th grade mission project. So this alternative curriculum is currently undergoing a trial run at a charter school on the Verona Reservation. And her curriculum provides a different focus than European contact. Instead, it analyzes Native American village life and traditional ecology of the land. So instead of building a mission, a model of a mission, students build their own model of a native village, and they also choose a type of environment to research as an alternative to their report on a mission. They do a report on an ecology system, so such as mountains or grasslands. And then they're also able to explore how that environment changed as a result of when the Spanish settlers arrived. They completely altered how the California ecology was pre-contact by bringing in new plants and disease and development of the area. So this is how her curriculum is different than the state curriculum of the mission project. And so while it's undergoing a trial run currently, it will actually be available for other schools to incorporate into their classroom beginning fall 2019, so this fall. And there will be additional material released in 2020 in conjunction with their Creation Story exhibit in 2020. And so similar to Verona, many other Native American tribes and tribal museums are working on their own educational curriculum, which is why if a school is, or if a school or a museum is educating the public about Native American culture, I really strongly recommend, will strongly encourage that they reach out to their local Native American communities, because these tribes may have resources or concepts for lesson plans already developed and access to primary sources that an educator at a school may not have access to or may not be aware of. And so these resources can greatly enhance the accuracy and educational value for students and for the general public when they're learning about this topic. And so through this pre-conference workshop, I myself was able to develop a greater understanding of the importance of incorporating Native voice into educational programming and the retelling of the California history for today's youth. And this experience of learning about tribal museum programming may influence me in my future work, because I would love to continue in the museum field, and I would love to incorporate Mallory's methods for youth programming in my own career. And so at the San Bernardino Museum where I interned, we held a public event recently, and we had demonstrations of basket weaving and of how to make pinch pots and coil pots. and I was helping young students how to make the pots, and I found it to be a really rewarding experience. It was very popular with children who were very young, even toddlers. They just wanted to play in the clay, and but it was rewarding to kind of teach them about the methods and the use of these pinch and coil pots. And it was very engaging for them, and they could take this away and show their parents, look what I made, and talk about it in a real way. And even a student, even a child who was only 5 years old, they could say what it was after learning about it, and they could talk about the concept behind it a little, at a basic level. So anyway, I think it is a really rewarding experience to develop these kinds of programming, and I think that museums should be doing it regularly if they have the resources, especially working with young students to keep students learning in new ways. And so if anyone has any questions for Mallory about her work or about resources, she can be contacted through the Verona Cultural Center, and she is open to answering questions about this topic. And I want to thank you all for listening to my presentation. I really appreciate you all taking your time to tune in about this. And now I can answer any questions if there's any for me about this presentation or topic. So thank you. I'll give you a chance to type in a chat if needed. Let's see.
Thank you very much, Jamie. It looks like that we won't have any questions. Oh, wait, there's one right now.
Oh, Mallory says, thank you for attending. Well, thank you, Mallory, for all your help. You're so helpful, and it was wonderful to work with you, and I'm so glad that I got to learn more about your work. It's been a great experience.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mallory, for supporting Jamie in this project. Thank you to all of our collaborators. This is a great project that allows those that are somewhat new to the field to collaborate with those that they can learn from, and it's always really interesting to see what comes out of it. So thank you, Jamie. Jamie, can you do me a favor and advance your slide one more time for me?
Yes. Okay. I don't know, this is my, oh, there we go, okay.
Thank you. Great, so just to close the program today, I mean, these presentations that you've heard about took place at the 2019 CAM conference in San Francisco. As we heard, that theme was changing the narrative, and we are right now soliciting proposals for sessions and workshops and dialogue discussions that would take place in our conference next year, which is in Los Angeles. And the deadline for proposals is June 7th, so there's still time to collaborate and work together with others to put some proposals together. Again, that deadline is June 7th, and we thank you all for participating in today's webinar, and we look forward to seeing you in Los Angeles next year. So thank you, and have a great afternoon.